Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fund the People podcast and the latest installment of our Defend Nonprofits, Defend Democracy series. I'm your host, Rusty Stahl. I'm also president and CEO of Fund the People, a national organization that works to maximize investment in America's nonprofit workforce. You can find us online at fundthepeople.org. We'd appreciate it if you come. There's tons of free resources on the site, so please check it out, fundthepeople.org. Now, in today's episode, I'm here on my own to speak with you about what I learned at Foundations on the Hill, the annual gathering of philanthropic networks and leaders to speak with and build relationships with our senators and representatives in the U.S. House. I was there during the week of March 16th through 19th. So that was just a few weeks ago, and I learned some important information and some important lessons. Before I jump in to sharing all of that, and there are important policy updates I'm going to share with you today, I do want to say that I am a policy novice, okay? At the risk of sounding overly self-deprecating or undermining my own legitimacy in this space, I am not a lobbyist. I am not a public policy PhD. I am a passionate advocate for America's nonprofit workforce. And I've been in the philanthropy and nonprofit community for about 25 years, working in various roles as a grant maker, a fundraiser, an association leader, and as a student of the field and an advocate for the field. So that's how I came to this. Second caveat here is that, with these Defend Nonprofits, Defend Democracy efforts during the last year, some people, I think, feel that some of my essays are too partisan or political. Well, one of the things I heard from a Republican Hill staff member, a pretty senior person during Foundations on the Hill, was that there's a distinction between partisanship and politics, that things are political. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are or have to be partisan. And so defending our sector and our democracy is distinctly not a partisan set of issues. Democracy is not a partisan issue, and the nonprofit sector and the nonprofit workforce are not a partisan matter. Everybody in this country, no matter their ideology, party affiliation, or positioning in the sector or in government, everybody benefits from and hopefully contributes to philanthropy and nonprofits in some way or another. And the entire nonprofit sector is nonpartisan, is largely not ideological, right? Most of the nonprofit sector is pragmatic, practical, trying to get things done for our communities, and has nothing to do with political parties or partisan politics. But these issues have become political. And in some cases, there is a clear divide in the political parties in Washington around democracy and around the nonprofit sector. And that's not my fault. That's not something I can control. And so you'll hear me talking about Republicans on Capitol Hill. That's because of the stands they've taken or are considering, or the rhetoric that they are using, not because I am trying to be partisan in any way. And nor do I really think this should be a partisan issue. I think defending the nonprofit workforce is an American issue, and I would get heated about any politician who attacks our sector. So those are my caveats, friends. The other thing I want to say here is that we need to forge our own narrative, our own framing, and we have to be blunt, we have to be heated, we have to be passionate, we have to get attention for our message. Because if we're nice and milquetoast and quiet, nobody's gonna care on Capitol Hill. The squeaky wheels get the grease, and we need some grease. The nonprofit sector and the nonprofit workforce needs some political capital, and we have to build that. We have to work toward that. We have to earn that. It doesn't come for free, and we don't have it right now. We don't even get talked about in policy debates or in the media, even when our issues are on the chopping block. Our sector is being legislated or being impacted by executive or judicial branch activities. So this is a real problem. So that's why you'll hear me being more quote unquote political and more heated than I normally would have been a year and a half ago. I just wanted to share that for those of you who may be skeptical or want to tune out because you think I'm being somehow partisan. All right, Foundations on the Hill. I want to thank the United Philanthropy Forum, the Council on Foundations, Independent Sector, the three groups that sponsor and organize Foundations on the Hill, as well as other important partners who were part of that process, including the National Council of Nonprofits and even the Philanthropy Roundtable. Fund the People is a longstanding institutional member of the United Philanthropy Forum, which brings together a lot of funder networks and infrastructure organizations, both regional and place-based, as well as issue and functionally focused infrastructure groups. And we're one of those, and we're proud to be. So thanks to United Philanthropy Forum for really being the key organizer of Foundations on the Hill yet again this year. So I'm going to share some bad news and some good news, and of course, a call to action in this episode. The bad news: things remain ominous for the nonprofit workforce on Capitol Hill. We heard in the briefings, congressional Republicans have some concerns about the nonprofit sector that we need to be proactive in hearing and engaging with them and educating them about our sector. Some apparently believe in their hearts of hearts that the nonprofit sector is too left-leaning. They're concerned about wokeness in the nonprofit sector. They're concerned about campus protests that they perceive to be affiliated with the nonprofit sector and that they perceive to be riots, or they are at least pretending they think are riots when they are protests, peaceful protests. They think these protests are somehow destructive. And so those are some of the things I heard. We need to educate and inform them that if they like their churches and their Boy Scouts and their hospitals and their private prep schools and colleges and their fraternities and sororities, all of those things, all of those food banks and museums and cultural institutions that they value, those are nonprofits. Even right-wing institutions like the Heritage Foundation are nonprofits. So there's plenty of right-wing nonprofits, there's plenty of left-wing nonprofits, and as I said earlier, the majority that are nonpartisan, non-political, non-ideological, squarely trying to get things done for the country and not engaged or affiliated with any particular ideology or political party. And I think folks on Capitol Hill, the staff, the legislators, they need to understand these things. And both the Democrats and Republicans have a lot of learning to do about the nonprofit sector. Others of the Republicans, particularly those who came and spoke to us and are engaged with the field, they are connected to the nonprofit sector. And that needs to be built upon. They understand the importance and the role of nonprofits in their communities with their constituents. They are on boards, their families are on boards, they're donors, et cetera. And so those connections are there, and we can build upon that. We heard that there's more coming from Congress about the nonprofit sector. There was some discussion about possible changes to the 990. There was some discussion about overhead or indirect cost rates in government funding and potentially the idea of putting some kind of cap on that at what I would say is a completely unreasonable. First of all, putting a cap is unreasonable. And then the rate mentioned, which I think was 15 or 20%, also completely unreasonable. So there's a lot of education. I was kind of shocked to hear that Congress would really even think about an IRS form, that I-90, or indirect costs in nonprofits. But it was there from staffers who have some sense of the sector and the tax law related to it. We also heard that there could be more hearings from Congress about the nonprofit sector that are coming. So we got to hold our hats and buckle up for the hat. We also heard about some specific legislation that has been introduced. Two bills I wanted to make sure you know about. One is a bill about fiscal sponsorship. It's introduced by U.S. Representative Nathaniel Moran, Texas's Congressional District Number 1, and Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. This bill is called the Stop Proxy Organizations Nurturing Subversive Operations and Riots Act. The acronym that spells without the word act is SPONSOR, as in fiscal sponsor. This bill is meant to, I'm quoting from their press release, which I'll put in the show notes, will prevent nonprofit organizations from funneling money to progressive left-wing organizations that intentionally agitate or seek to cause harm and destruction in our country. The legislation will penalize large 501c3 organizations by holding them liable for the conduct of the projects they sponsor for actions such as burning down cities. Not an easy task, but we're up for it. That's a joke. Burning down cities, rioting outside government facilities, college campuses, or even places of worship. The bill amends Section 501 of the IRS Code to close loopholes by establishing legal accountability between sponsoring organizations and their sponsored projects. So this is about fiscal sponsorship. Fund the People is a fiscally sponsored organization. We are proud to be a part of Community Partners, the LA-based civic hub that fiscally sponsors many organizations. And so I am concerned about this bill, both for the sector and for our fiscal sponsor and our organization. So even if you're not fiscally sponsored, you should be concerned about this bill and look into it. So as I said, I'll put the press release and a link to the actual legislation itself into the show notes, and I encourage you to look into that. The headline for this press release, Moran, Cruz introduce legislation to deter nonprofit sponsorships of left-wing radicals. You can hear my sarcasm and cynicism about this bill because I think the language they are using and the suggestions they are implying are a little outlandish, but it's important to take it seriously nonetheless. The other bill that's important to know, that's part of the bad news, is that, unfortunately, a bill has come back that you've heard me talk about in the past, shall we say. It is now known as H.R. 6800, but it is essentially the same bill as we all knew as H.R. 9495. It is almost identical language. It would allow the federal government to label a nonprofit as a terrorist supporting organization domestically, something that there is no current law or legal framing around domestic terrorist organizations or domestic terrorist supporting organizations. So this bill would allow the government, the Treasury Department, where IRS is housed, to label any 501 organization a terrorist supporting organization, to revoke its tax-exempt status, and to require the organization to challenge that decision after the decision and declaration is made. Similarly, in a 90-day framework, similarly through a process within the Treasury Department before it could go to a court. Similar to previous times this has been introduced, no evidence would need to be introduced or shared with the organization that is being accused or punished, nor with the public, nor with the courts, particularly if the executive branch invokes national security, they won't have to share any evidence of any kind. So very similar, almost identical to the H.R. 9495 bill. Now, basically, this same bill was introduced in November of 2023 as H.R. 6408. It passed the House, but did not go further to the Senate. The bill was introduced again in September of 2024, so a year later, as H.R. 9495, passed the House, didn't go anywhere in the Senate. It was introduced in the Senate that time. It was introduced as Senate Bill 4136 in November or December of 2024, but was not brought up for a vote. And then it was introduced a third time as language within the major reconciliation bill last year, H.R. 1, which was talked about as the Big Beautiful Bill Act in summer of 2025. And it was removed before that package went to the floor of the House for a vote, because reconciliation bills are supposed to be about taxes and government revenue, and this bill doesn't actually affect government revenue, and so it was taken out. And then it was introduced a fourth time as H.R. 6800 in December of 2025, late last year. So the folks I talked to in the organizations that advocate for our sector professionally with lobbyists and lawyers and public policy experts feel that this doesn't necessarily have momentum or a pathway to get a vote even in the House or move forward in the Senate. but is important for us all to know that it has been introduced for a fourth time, that it is something that is not going away. And we all know that the executive branch has been threatening to strip nonprofits of their tax-exempt status, particular ones, has been unilaterally declaring certain organizations to be terrorist organizations, both in propaganda, but also in writing. And so there is a kind of whirlwind or cycle. It's hard to know where it starts and where it's picked up, but the executive branch is producing executive memos and propaganda, which then are informing and fueling and perhaps pressuring the legislative branch, Congress, to produce these kind of bills, which then enable or reinforce what the executive branch is doing. And so there is a back and forth happening, I think, there. That's just kind of my read of the situation. But that is there and important to know about. And the fact that it is consistently being brought back through different means as an independent bill, connected with other things in previous versions of the bill, put into a reconciliation bill. There is some persistence here. And although it's been called a messaging bill, and perhaps it is a messaging bill, it also could take off and gain momentum and become law at some point. So it is important to pay attention to for everyone in the sector, to know this is happening, to talk to your congressional representatives about it so they know it's happening and know why we think it's not a good idea. You know, some people dismiss this as, oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a big change. It's about stopping terrorism. And we all want to stop terrorism. At least I know I do. I'm sure most of the folks listening to this don't want to promote terrorism and want to stop it. But the real world impact of this legislation would not just take away a nonprofit's tax-exempt status and then it would become a for-profit or it would become an informal organization. The real world impact of this bill becoming law and being used would really be a chain reaction that would challenge the ability of the defamed nonprofits to exist. It would basically shut down those organizations, is my read of what would happen in practical terms. So those are the two bills I wanted to share with you. The Sponsor Act and the 6800 bill. On the executive side of the ledger, there are a number of things going on that are important to pay attention to. We have the FBI and the IRS have formed a new initiative together to investigate nonprofits over suspected possible links to domestic terrorism. So this is kind of the follow-up on the heightened rhetoric after Charlie Kirk was assassinated, when Stephen Miller and Vice President Vance did a takeover of Charlie Kirk's podcast for a day and promised to track down and punish progressive funders and nonprofits who might have had something to do with that, which there was no evidence to say such a thing, that any nonprofits were connected to the assassination, nor has any evidence I've heard since then happened. So this is an investigation in search of a crime. But anyway, if you Google this, you'll see CBS News has covered it, and the National Council of Nonprofits, I think, has some information about this. We will put a show notes link to the CBS article. Apparently, in December, Attorney General Bondi ordered law enforcement agencies and federal prosecutors to prioritize efforts to investigate and prosecute groups and individuals who belong to the anti-fascist Antifa movement or who are deemed, quote unquote, extremist. The quote from Pam Bondi is, quote, "These domestic terrorists use violence or the threat of violence to advance political and social agendas, including opposition to law and immigration enforcement, extremist views in favor of mass migration and open borders, adherence to radical gender ideology, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, or anti-Christianity." Actually, that's in a memo from the Attorney General's office. So we will put a link in the show notes to the memo as well. Two other items on the executive branch side. The Department of Education is attempting to change the public service loan forgiveness program to exclude workers who have worked in organizations that address the issues and values in communities that the administration opposes, things like immigration, LGBTQ rights, climate change, diversity, equity, and inclusion. There was a public comment period for that. This is regulation, so this is not a bill. This is them changing their own rules at the agency. And now the National Council of Nonprofits and others have an active lawsuit because the Department of Education, once the public comment period was over, went forward with their efforts anyway. So NCN has sued them, and I think the hearing will be in May. So we'll put a link to more information about that lawsuit in the show notes. The third thing in the executive branch activity is that the Doge boys took over the central website for applying for federal grants, where nonprofits or tribes or states, I guess, apply for grants. That was like a year ago, maybe more. It's housed in the Health and Human Services Department, this grants.gov website. And so all the different agencies put their requests for proposals. It's called something else, but all the opportunities for funding to apply from across all the different federal agencies go through grants.gov. And so Doge took that over, took control of that. And so now the administration is proposing a new certification process where any institution, nonprofit or otherwise, that is applying for federal grants or in order to receive federal grants. So I think this would apply to existing grantees as well as potential grantees, should it become the regulation, would have to sign a legal document stating that they agree to the terms, to the values, to the priorities of the administration, and that they are not going to do things like advance equity or inclusion and not support immigrants or climate, the environment, or LGBTQ people, basically. And it's a very convoluted, bureaucratic language that's involved. It's like hard to know what the words actually mean in these certification proposals that they're putting forward. But right now there is a public comment period during March. And so National Council of Nonprofits, again, has a package of materials, which we're going to link in the show notes. Every nonprofit and foundation and person involved in the nonprofit sector should check out the guide for submitting your public comments. There's also a sign-on letter opposing this certification. I call this the new Pledge of Allegiance to the Trump administration. Right, they're trying to get us to sign on to this litmus test, this censorship control-oriented Pledge of Allegiance to the MAGA principles or values such as they are. Do we want that? Do we want to do that? And do we want to force every organization that wants federal dollars to have to sign on to that and be legally accountable for following that certification? I think it's a bad idea. I think every American who cares about liberty, freedom, the Constitution should be extremely concerned about this and should submit public comments and sign on to the letter opposing it, no matter your ideology or political affiliation or partisan stance. Okay, so that's a lot, right? Now for the good news, folks. There is a little bit of good news, which is nice. So one thing is that, again, the infrastructure groups, the Council on Foundations, the United Philanthropy Forum, Independent Sector, and the other groups have helped Congress to relaunch a bipartisan philanthropy caucus. Congressman Blake Moore is one of the leaders of this. We got to hear from him during Foundations on the Hill, which was great. And the idea of this philanthropy caucus is that it will help to increase charitable giving in local communities. So there's a nice press release about this from December 2nd, 2025, from Congressman Blake Moore's office. He's a Republican from Utah's 1st District. We will put a link to that in the show notes. We also got to hear from Congressman Danny Davis, a Democrat, which was great as well, who's helped to launch this caucus. Both are members of the House Ways and Means Committee, and there are other members of that committee who are part of this caucus. And so that's very important because a lot of tax policy and issues related to philanthropy and nonprofits go back to the House Ways and Means Committee. And there are great quotes in the press release from Deborah Thomas, the president and CEO of United Philanthropy Forum, as well as other leaders from our sector, both in Utah and around the country. So definitely you want to check that out. We were able to hear from Congressman Moore and Congressman Davis and others who are part of this caucus, and they're very excited and appreciate our sector. So that was thrilling to hear. I don't think it's gotten started in the Senate yet, but I hope there's an effort to do that. I believe there is. This caucus had started years ago and kind of drifted off, become inactive. And so the infrastructure groups have helped Congress to bring it back. And it's an important opportunity to get some visibility for our sector and our issues in the legislative process. The other thing that made me hopeful was that there's a new bill called the Small Nonprofit Retirement Security Act of 2025. It's H.R. 4548, and that's been led by Congressman Vern Buchanan, again from the House Ways and Means Committee, alongside Representatives Jimmy Panetta from California, Blake Moore, who I've previously mentioned, Republican of Utah, Brad Schneider, Democrat of Illinois, Senators James Lankford, Republican of Oklahoma, and Senator Catherine Cortez Masto, Democrat of Nevada. So it's bicameral, both the Senate and the House, and bipartisan. So there's a companion bill in the Senate as well as the bill. And the bill would help small nonprofit organizations offer retirement plans by extending federal tax incentives that are currently available only to for-profit employers. So the idea is that this would help nonprofits with a smaller budget, a smaller staff, to begin offering a retirement plan for employees. And this has been championed by independent sector, which has been working to figure out its role in supporting the nonprofit workforce from a policy perspective. So we're very appreciative of our colleagues at independent sector for identifying a number of tax incentives that are available to for-profit employers that have not been made available to nonprofits, and to turn that into a legislative agenda, beginning with this H.R. 4548, the Small Nonprofit Retirement Security Act of 2025. So we'll put a link to the press release and the legislation about this bill. And if you are in any of those congresspeople's districts or states, it'd be good to give them a call or an email and let them know you appreciate them introducing this important bill and how much it might mean to nonprofits in your community. The other thing I wanted to share from my experience is I had the opportunity to meet with a longstanding congressional staff person who supports a committee in the Senate that works on workforce issues, broadly speaking, in the country. I was able to go in with my colleague from independent sector to that meeting, which was fantastic. And we were able to talk to them about the important and surprising things about the nonprofit workforce. It's pretty clear from that meeting and previous experiences that I've had talking to staff members on Capitol Hill that it's very rare that the elected officials and their staff actually know how big the nonprofit workforce is as a part of the economy. How many jobs, how much is paid in wages, how much is paid in payroll taxes, just how much their constituents actually rely upon employment as well as services in the nonprofit sector. And so we shared with this staff person a brief document that shared 5 surprising things about the nonprofit workforce. And so I will be sharing that with you so that you can use it as well, because you should be educating your representatives and your own board and staff yourself about what is the nonprofit workforce, what is the nonprofit labor market, what is this sector, and why is it so important, not only in the services it provides to our community members and our constituents, but also how it is an important part of our democracy and our economy. So here's the 5 surprising facts about the nonprofit workforce in the United States that we shared with folks in Congress. 1, the U.S. nonprofit sector is a major job creator. with nearly 12.8 million paid workers. It is almost 10% of all non-governmental jobs in the United States and the third largest private source of jobs as an industry. Larger than manufacturing, larger than construction, larger than finance and insurance, a major job creator. You know what people on Capitol Hill care about sometimes? Jobs. You know what they don't talk about when they talk about jobs? Nonprofits. But they should, because we are a major job creator. That's fact one. Fact two, nonprofit jobs are a crucial part of state and regional economies. Nonprofits employ an even larger share of private workers in 26 states, larger than that, 10%. And it's spread all across the country. Half of the states' employment is larger than 10% coming from nonprofits. Third, nonprofits are durable and reliable employers, even during major crises like the Great Recession or the COVID-19 pandemic. We are able to actually keep employees employed, keep Americans in their jobs more than for-profit businesses when the economy sucks or when there is a major crisis. And that is in the data. This is all data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the federal government itself. Fact four, U.S. nonprofits paid over $8.73 billion in wages to their 12.8 million employees in 2022. Despite assumptions about low pay, nonprofit workers earn average weekly wages that are nearly the same as their for-profit peers overall. And in the key fields where nonprofits dominate over for-profits, like social assistance, education, and healthcare, nonprofit workers earn significantly more than their for-profit peers. In fact, five, despite this crucial role that nonprofits as employers and nonprofit workers play in the U.S. economy, nonprofit wage data is only released every 5 years by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, rather than every quarter for every other industry. And they could change that. The Bureau could change that with a little bit of money, not a lot, and a little bit of political will from Congress. So those are the 5 surprising facts about the U.S. nonprofit workforce. And again, I'll share the fact sheet with you in the show notes. It's extremely important that nonprofits around the country, particularly in the states and districts that lean Republican, because again, it's the Republicans who are saying we are cynical and skeptical and concerned about the nonprofit sector. We're concerned about fraud. We're concerned about this left-leaning bias. We're concerned about riots/protests. So it's important for those of you as individuals and organizations who are represented by folks in the Republican Party to engage with them, to build relationships, and to educate them about the nonprofit sector and the nonprofit workforce. So everyone should be contacting their legislators now, and not to ask for particular bills per se, unless you already have some dialogue going with your elected representatives. Then you could share some of these bills I've been talking about. Say, these look bad and would be harmful for these reasons, and these look good and helpful for these reasons. And so we'd like you to know, make sure you know about them and know our take on them. So build relationships, communicate, educate at the district level as well as in Washington. That is the advice we got from the senior level legislative staff, Republicans and Democrats, at Foundations on the Hill. Communicate with the staff members of your elected officials. And do it now so that when these bills come up, they will call you to get your understanding and your perspective. So that there's a level of trust there where they go, oh yeah, they're talking about corruption and riots in nonprofits, but we're actually hearing great things from these nonprofits we know in our district. So that doesn't resonate. Let me call them. That's where we all need to be. And from what I can see, these powerful people, these staff people who set the agenda for our country and set the laws, they are open to talking to us in the nonprofit sector. In fact, I think we are actually a breath of fresh air for them, because we are not lobbying them for, the ability to go make money on avocados or selling cars or polluting the environment or whatever the things are that businesses want Congress to let them do. We actually have alignment around serving their constituents for the public good. And so we need to step up and use our community knowledge and expertise and share those stories of what we do and how people in our communities benefit from nonprofit work, and also what the pain points are when some of these bills or propaganda come down or these funding cuts come down. What happens to nonprofits? What happens to the people we serve? Because they need to understand that and how that will impact the churches and camps and education institutions after school in a basic social safety net that keeps their constituents fed, clothed, housed, healthy, alive. So that, my friends, is my report to you from Foundations on the Hill, from my experience in Capitol Hill the week of March 16th. I hope this has been helpful. Please do visit the show notes for all of the press releases and legislative information I've shared with you. And feel free to share your comments. You can leave comments on the episode in Spotify. You can leave comments through a review in Apple Podcasts. You can leave comments on LinkedIn when we post this episode there. You can leave comments on YouTube. We're now posting episodes, both audio and video versions of this episode will be up on YouTube. And feel free to be in touch if you have questions, comments, or want to get more engaged. Feel free to email info@fundthepeople.org, and we will do our best to address your concerns. So thank you so much. And remember to defend nonprofits, defend democracy. And while you're at it, keep your tank full, take care of yourself, and take care of one another. I will speak with you again soon here on your Fund the People podcast.